Close your eyes slowly. Let the quiet air touch your skin like morning dew in the courtyard of a monastery long abandoned. There is no harsh sound, only the soft whisper of wind brushing the grass and the gentle steps of time walking backward. Imagine you are sitting near a small stained glass window, in a cool old stone room facing a cloister garden no one ever visits. The walls around you still echo the shadows of monks. Those who once walked slowly through the dusty halls, carrying small candles, reading sacred texts in whispers not meant to be heard. But tonight, we do not come to follow their stories. We come because the floor beneath their underground room holds something that was never meant to be found. This monastery was built in the 12th century. Once it was sacred, revered, guarded tightly from the outside world. Not just anyone could enter. Pilgrims could only gaze at its outer walls. Villagers only heard its bells. Even nobles were only allowed to speak at its gate. But now the building is empty. Nothing more than a moss-covered skeleton of stone. Its floors are cracked, its walls damp. The wooden crosses on the walls are rotting, and the remaining copies of the Bible have turned into dusty scraps, unreadable by any eye. Until one day, a group of archaeologists found something strange. While digging an old storage room beneath a monastery, they discovered a small chest, hidden under layers of deep red bricks that didn't match the original structure. The chest was made of dark oak with rusted iron hinges. No lock, no official seal of the church. But when opened, the world grew quieter than ever before. Inside was a book, a Bible, but not the Bible you know. Its writing was an old Latin script, in a style once used by scholars in 13th century Italy. The pages were thin as tightly pressed leather, and the inky van, after centuries, remained fresh and dark. But what made them shudder wasn't that. On the first page, written in black ink by hand, was a sentence. "He who reads this without faith shall lose his mind." The archaeologists thought it was a joke, till one of them, who read it alone at night, never spoke again. This book is not just an object. It feels like something that did not want to be found. No church record mentions it. No monk ever spoke of its name. It doesn't appear in the Vatican document indexes. As if the book was never written by man. It tells of the creation of the world, but not by the God we name in prayer. The names within it are unknown. Its angels have two faces, and its moral laws are the opposite of what we know. But before we go deeper, sit back once more. Close your eyes. Imagine a cold night in November. The year 1317. The snow has not yet fallen, but the morning frost freezes the grass. The chapel's fire glows faintly, and a monk's footsteps echo weakly across the stone floor. There is a strange light beneath the chapel floor. No one knows where it comes from, for no lantern burns there. But the light appears every night, for 21 consecutive nights, then stops, until finally the youngest monk disappears from his cell. He is found the next morning, beneath the altar, holding the very same book. And from that night on, every journal entry written in the monastery stopped. Every monk's name in the church register erased. And every cross in the underground room turned upside down, facing the earth. Imagine waking up in the year 1311 inside an old monastery on the forgotten edge of France, surrounded by oak forests, and the autumn fog that never truly lifts from the ground. The air feels like a damp blanket wrapped around everything. Morning light has not yet pierced the stained glass windows, only peeking shyly through cracks in the stone walls. You are a quiet young novice, newly sworn in, with a simple task: cleaning the floor of the manuscript copying room in the underground level, a chamber rarely visited except by the oldest and calmest of the scribes. No one has ever asked you to speak. No one is allowed to talk except during prayers. This monastery is known for its silence, but also for customs that feel strange even among other orders. There are no morning bells, no open Sunday Mass. What happens behind these stone walls seems hidden from the outside world, and the brothers seem content to keep it that way. You brush dust from the corner of a limestone tile, and almost accidentally, the floor presses lightly downward. Not loudly, not suddenly. Just a click, barely audible. Beneath it, the tile trembles softly and shifts a little. There is a space down there, a hollow filled with compact earth and old cloth wrapped around something. No gold, no skull. Just a book, and not just any book. Its size resembles the usual Bibles copied by the brothers. The outer leather looks the same. Even the metal clasps shimmer faintly like other sacred manuscripts. But when you gently open the first page, a cold sensation crawls from your fingertips to the back of your neck. The Latin letters, printed in red ink, do not form psalms. No prophets' names, no Gospel of Matthew. Instead, stories about a divine figure never mentioned in any known scripture. Not Jesus, not Moses, but a name unfamiliar and never heard in any prayer. You try to close it, but your fingers won't move. Your eyes keep scanning line after line, as if enchanted by the calmness of its narrative. This book does not whisper sin or salvation. It speaks of a parallel world, similar yet deviated, with a church never founded by Rome and priests who worship light not because of God, but because of something that existed before the word God was ever known to man. There is no screaming, no fire of hell. Yet it is precisely because of this that the fear runs deeper. Fear of something so calm, so certain, as if it had been here long before any church was built on this land. Imagine standing inside that old monastery as night begins to fall, when the candlelight from the main hall slowly fades, and only the sounds of rats and the whisper of wind remain. The cold stone floor beneath your feet begins to feel like it hides something below, as if a space beneath is holding its breath for centuries. No one knows exactly who first became suspicious, but a young monk noticed the chapel floor always felt warmer in a particular corner. Then, silently, they began to dig, not with shovels or hammers, but with bare hands and repeated prayers, as if afraid the sound of tools would wake something long asleep. They did not tell the abbot, and certainly wrote nothing in the official records, because what they found did not belong to the official history. Beneath a pile of stones was an old wooden chest, too fragile to touch, yet not crumbling. There was no lock, But when they placed their fingers on the lid, the wood cracked with a sound so soft it felt like a whisper. Inside was a book. Same size as their Holy Scripture, same weight, same thickness. But the first page was not the Gospel of Matthew. The handwriting was similar, nearly indistinguishable from the original manuscript, but the names written there felt foreign. Not Jesus, not Mary, not the apostles. The names that appeared were never mentioned in any teachings, but they felt familiar, as if they had been whispered in sleep, in prayer, or in someone's deepest fear. The book did not glow, did not shimmer, did not move. But from that moment, the monastery's silence began to shift. Night prayers grew longer. Monks began forgetting their memorized verses. Some started drawing strange symbols in the margins of their journals. And in the chapel's corner, the large wooden cross slowly tilted. Though no earthquake had occurred, no one admitted to touching it. But everyone knew something had been awakened. The days that followed moved slowly, as if time inside the monastery began to resist its usual rhythm. Dawn arrived with paler light than before, and the morning bell sounded slightly off-key, as if made from a different metal. The monks still performed their duties, cleaning the altar, preparing the dining tables, copying scriptures in the scriptorium. But something had changed in the way they moved. Their hands were quicker, their eyes rarely met, and every whisper sounded too faint to understand. They hid the book, of course, tucked behind a shelf of rarely touched manuscripts, covered in rough cloth, as if it were just an unfinished apocryphal text. But almost every night, one by one, the monks began to visit that shelf alone. There were no written rules forbidding it, but no one had the courage to speak about it openly. They came with different reasons: to ensure its safety, to study it in secret, or simply to touch the pages that remained warm, even when the night air froze. None of them read it aloud. They only traced the letters with their fingertips, and many of them began to dream afterward. Dreams that did not belong to them. They dreamed of places they did not know, with skies forever gray and bells echoing from no direction. They dreamed of being someone else, a faceless blacksmith, an old woman with a split tongue, a child crying blood without knowing why. And when they woke, they carried remnants, palms that burned, hair that turned white overnight, tongues that fell silent. Yet none of them spoke, because they all understood. If you say the dream out loud, you won't wake up in this world again. Now imagine you are the firekeeper in that monastery. Your task is simple: to ensure the flame in the main hearth never dies, for it is here that rejected scriptures are burned, and it is here that white-robed figures reflect in the silence of night. You live in a small room beside the kitchen, with little time to read, but close enough to the heart of the monastery to observe. You watch them, one by one, walking soundlessly to the hidden shelf. You note the times they enter and leave. Sometimes they stay for 5 minutes, sometimes 2 hours. But one night, you witness something you'll never forget. One of the youngest monks, the one who still stammers through psalms, arrives earlier than usual. He carries a small candle, and through the not quite closed wooden door, you peer in. He sits on the cold stone floor, opens the book slowly, and presses both his palms against the first page. Not a word is spoken, but suddenly his face changes, not into calmness, but into emptiness, as if he had been abandoned by himself. He begins to smile, but the smile does not reach his eyes. He tears a strip from his robe, winds it around his head like a crown. Then he speaks, not in his own voice. His voice is low, deep, and seems to come from beneath the earth. You do not understand the language he speaks, but your heart begins to beat in a strange rhythm, not your own. And when he finishes, he closes the book, leaves it behind, and walks away without his candle. He never speaks again after that night. And 2 weeks later, he is found sitting in the church, holding 2 wooden crosses, one in each hand. His grip is so tight that the wood cracks, but his eyes are shut tightly, as if in deep, peaceful sleep. Yet he does not breathe. After that night, voices began to echo in the hallway leading to the book chamber. Not footsteps. Not the sighing wind that often passed through the stained glass cracks. But something like wet whispering, like someone reading from beneath the surface of water. The monks began to grow suspicious of one another. They never spoke of it, of course, because silence had long been part of their sacred rule. But you could feel it. The tension in the refectory, the averted eyes. The nights that stretched longer because no one wished to be the first to sleep. One morning, the abbot decided to lock the bookshelf. He brought a heavy key forged in black iron and summoned the brethren to witness its sealing. But something strange happened. As he reached the padlock with the key, the metal recoiled not with magic, not with flames or holy fire, but as if it had turned unbearably hot. His skin blistered the moment he touched it. He did not scream, but you saw his hand tremble and tears fall before he could speak a word. He stepped back. No one replaced him. The lock remained untouched. The book stayed where it was, and no one admitted to reading it again. No one dared touch it. Strangely, though, you knew, every night new slips of parchment would appear near the shelf. Tiny fragments, handwriting that varied. Short phrases like, "I know they can hear," or "the sun was not the first light." And no one ever confessed to writing them. You collected them in secret, tucking them into a small chest beneath your bed, until one night you found a new piece. The language wasn't Latin nor Greek, but it was written in your own handwriting, and you had no memory of writing it. The next day, you tried to distract yourself with daily duties sweeping the church floor, copying ancient manuscripts, raking the brittle leaves in the back courtyard. But out of the corner of your eye, the bookshelf remained, unchanged, unmoving, yet watching. Days grew heavier. The bell no longer sounded like a call to prayer, but like a reminder that time still pressed on, that you had not escaped whatever lurked. One of the monks, Brother Iosifus, stopped speaking entirely. Not just silence, but something hollow. His mouth still moved, as if reciting from an unseen page. Sometimes, from a distance, you could see him writing in the air with his fingers forming strange characters none of you had ever learned. One monk tried to touch him, Brother Lucianus. The next morning, Lucianus was found seated at the kitchen table, eyes wide open, his tongue rotting as if he had died days ago. but his body was still warm. None of you spoke of it. His corpse was buried in the monastery side yard, without prayer, without bell, without name. From then on, you no longer touched one another. Distance was observed. Even during prayer, you no longer knelt side by side. You wrote all of this in a small notebook you hid behind the stone wall of your cell, not because you wished to remember, but because you knew that one day you would forget. And the only proof that any of this had ever happened would be the black ink on those pages. One night, the rain came hard. Lightning cracked occasionally in the distance, casting strange silhouettes across the window of your cell. You sat in the corner of the room, hugging your knees, trying to pray, but no words would come. Outside, footsteps echoed, not one or two, but many, as if the whole monastery was moving at once, though you knew there were no scheduled vigils. You peeked through a crack in your door and down the long stone corridor, slick with wind and dampness. You saw hooded figures walking slowly toward the storage room beneath the main altar. They wore black robes, faces hidden, carrying candles whose flames did not flicker. They did not move. The light was frozen. You followed from a distance, your heartbeat slow, as if your body feared making sound. The staircase to the cellar had been left open, and from below a sound rose, something never taught in Gregorian chant, low humming harmony, as if sung from mouths without lungs. In the darkness and silence of the night, one voice stood out reciting verses that were not from any book you had ever copied. The language was foreign, but the rhythm was prayerful. And when you turned back, trying to return to your cell, you realized you had written something on the wall with your own fingers. Unknowingly, patterns you did not recognize. But your hands were dirty with the old dust of stone, as if you had been there longer than you remembered. The next morning, everything returned to normal. The monks gathered in the dining hall, speaking in their usual whispers, eating warm porridge without any sign of the night before. No one mentioned the unmoving candles or the strange chanting from the cellar. Even the storage door appeared locked again, the rusted iron key hanging as it always did. You asked yourself if it had all been a dream, but your fingers were still blackened by dust, and beneath your robe's sleeve, you felt dry lines etched into your skin like invisible carvings made while you slept. That day, your task was to clean the chapel floor. As you wiped the stone tiles with a damp cloth, you noticed faint circular scratches near the altar, almost erased, but not entirely gone. You traced them with your fingertip, and suddenly the room felt colder, as if something beneath the floor touched your back. When you looked up toward the statue of Christ above the altar, you realized his eyes were gazing downward, toward the heavens, as usual. Perhaps it was only a shadow, or perhaps something had shifted since that night. In the afternoon, the church bell rang for a small mass, and everything proceeded as normal. But as the priest read the gospel, you saw the book in his hands was thicker than usual. Its leather was darker, and the carving on its spine was not a cross. It was a circle, with a symbol inside it you did not understand. You wondered, was he reading from the same book they found beneath the floor? The next night arrived quieter than usual. No wind slipped through the wooden window slats. No night birds sang. Even the ticking of the water clock in the back hallway sounded too slow, as if time itself hesitated to move. You didn't know why, but your heart refused to sleep. Your eyes stared at the dark ceiling in the shared dormitory, while the snores of the other monks filled the air like uneven waves. Then, just like the previous night, a faint light appeared beneath the door of the storage room. This time, not just one. 3 small lights, swaying gently like lanterns carried with extreme care. You could not resist your curiosity. Soundlessly, you rose, crept down the cold corridor, and stopped before the door now slightly ajar. Through the crack, you saw them, the monks, or perhaps only their bodies. They wore white robes, but their faces looked hollow, like wax masks. They circled a wooden table, and upon it, the book found the day before now lay open, glowing from within, with a silvery light that did not come from any candle. Their hands did not touch its pages, but hovered above them, as if downloading something from the parchment directly into their minds. One of them began chanting a prayer in a language unknown. Not Latin, not any tongue you had ever heard from any scripture. Its rhythm was like the sound of dripping water in an empty room, slow and steady, forming a pattern that seeped into your chest. You could not move. Even breathing felt difficult. But in the next moment, everything vanished. The door closed softly, and the corridor was dark again. You stood there alone, trembling, and you knew something was happening in this monastery, something the church never taught. The next morning, nothing seemed different. Not a single monk showed signs of having left their beds the night before. Their faces remained calm as they ate their morning porridge. Prayers were spoken with the same tone as every other day, and the bell calling for Mass rang with its usual, boring regularity that once comforted you. But not this time. Every smile looked painted onto faces that felt nothing. Every step sounded too light, as if those feet were not fully touching the earth. You tried speaking with Brother Tomas, who was usually friendly, but his eyes were blank when he replied, "No small jokes, no mention of restless sleep. Just a flat stare, as if you weren't entirely there." And when you asked about the book, the one that should be locked in the abbot's chamber, he went quiet, then whispered a prayer in Latin, as if that were the only answer allowed. That day passed in strange calm, as though the world had been quietly replaced while everyone slept. Even the guard dog in the back courtyard didn't bark. You began to notice more closely. Footprints in the corridor dust that led to nowhere. Pages torn from holy books in the library, and faint knocking sounds at night from the underground that no one ever explained. But no one spoke of any of it. The monks smiled, prayed, ate, slept, and you began to wonder, are they still human? Or has something from within that book already begun to take their place? You couldn't sleep the next night. Not because of fear, not because of the cold, but because the silence itself was too perfect. No crickets, no wind, gently brushing against the window bars as it usually did. Even the breathing of the monks in the beds around you sounded too uniform, too synchronized, as though governed by something that was not human. You sat up and watched, trying to find imperfection, Some small flaw that could convince you all of this was still real. But the room was like a painting, unchanging, lifeless, until you heard the sound of metal in the distance, a slow, creaking hinge. Not from the dining hall, not from the main corridor, but from below. From a hidden room that was supposed to have been sealed since the last century. You followed the sound, walking slowly along the cold stone hallway, your bare feet pressing into the moisture of forgotten years. There was no light but the small flame of the candle you held, and the walls seemed to absorb even that. When you reached the heavy wooden door that should not be open, you found it slightly ajar, as if waiting for you. Through the crack in the door, a staircase descended, one you had never seen before. The air from within smelled strange, not like mold, not like death, but like paper slowly burning. You knew you weren't supposed to enter, but you also knew, if not tonight, you would return tomorrow. Because something from down there was already watching you, and in its silence. It was calling. Your steps echoed softly as you descended the stairwell, each step greeting you with cold contact and a dampness that crept into the soles of your feet. The stairs kept winding downward, spiraling narrowly, far deeper than the monastery's known structure. The walls bore no paintings or statues like those above. Just rough stone, uneven and scarred with scratch marks, as if clawed from within. The scent of burning paper now mingled with the old metallic temps of something like dried blood. At last, you reached a lower chamber, and in the middle of the darkness was a long table, draped in thick black cloth, and atop it lay a heavy object wrapped in cracked old leather. A book, not a regular Bible. No cross, no church initials, not even a diocesan emblem. Its cover was dark, nearly black, but when you brought your candle closer, faint patterns emerged, circles within circles, intersecting endlessly with no start or end. You touched its surface, and the book felt warm, as if it had just been touched by someone else. But you knew no one in this monastery even knew this place existed. When you opened the first page, you found Latin writing. But not Latin you recognized. The words read like scripture, the rhythm like psalms. But the content was not about Jesus, not about salvation. It spoke of one who descended from the sky without a name, who ruled with silence, who wrote laws into the dreams of chosen people. And those laws, it said, must never be spoken aloud. There was no author's name, no date. Yet you began to read, slowly, word by word, as though the text wasn't meant to be spoken aloud, but to seep quietly, like mist, into a still mind. The book told of an age before time was counted, of a place unmapped by any world chart known to us. In the pages that followed, it spoke of a night that had no moon and never knew the sun. When a man awoke from his deep sleep beneath the ground, he had no name, knew no sin, feared no God of the church. He carried law in the form of dreams, and all who touched the pages of this book would dream. The same dream. A city of unbreakable white stone, a sky the color of blood and voices. Speaking in a language not born of this earth, you read, and your body shivered without warning. This wasn't mere heresy. This was something far older than any doctrine. In the margins of every page, small notes had been scribbled by a different hand. Notes from others who had read the book before you. They warned readers not to read too much at once. They listed the symptoms that followed: recurring dreams, whispering voices, blood from the ears, lost time. And eventually, a yearning to never again live under the sunlight. You set the book down gently, as if the sound of turning pages might summon something from behind the walls. Your breathing changed, quicker but deeper. And when you looked around, you noticed how quiet the room had become, as if the world had taken its final breath, and only you remained in the aging silence. But the curiosity could not be silenced. You reopened the page you had read, looking for something you might have missed. And there it was, written in ink, now fading, almost invisible unless seen from a certain angle. There was a small drawing. Not an illustration, a symbol. A sun split in two, encircled by 6 lines that looked like fingers, and beneath it, a word in a language you had never seen. But strangely, you knew its meaning, not because you had studied it, but because it felt like a memory planted at birth. The word meant door, and when you touched the symbol with the tip of your finger, you felt the room change. The air grew denser. The floor beneath you trembled slightly. There was no sound, but a pressure like whispers unspoken by any mouth. Then, the smell of damp earth, as if something was rising, not from the outer soil, but from beneath the floor on which you sat. Something that also knew the book had been opened again. Time no longer moved in the usual way in that room. Seconds grew heavy, as if each blink of your eyes held a long and silent pause. You tried to stand, but your knees felt weak, not from fear, but as if the floor beneath you had lost its firmness. The walls, once covered in paintings and crosses, now seemed to fade, replaced by a gray hue like ash. In the distance, from behind the cracked floor, a sound emerged like wet cloth being slowly dragged. Not footsteps, but something slower, more slippery. You glanced back at the book. Its pages were trembling, not from wind, but as if a heartbeat pulsed between its letters. The words were no longer passive. They moved, crawling, slowly shifting to the edges of the page, forming new sentences that had never been printed. And in the center, a name appeared. Not the name of a person, but something older than language. A name you did not speak aloud, but that echoed immediately within your mind, like the reverberation of a bottomless well. Now that name was not a call. It was a command. And as you read that silent command, the first tile in the floor slid aside. Dust rose. There was a hole beneath it, dark, deep, and damp. The smell of old iron and wet paper filled the air. Something had been opened, not with a key, but with a word. When you leaned down and looked into the hole, it wasn't darkness that greeted you, it was a dim red glow, moving like the dying flicker of nearly extinguished embers. But that light was not warm. It was like the gaze of something that never blinked. Your steps grew heavy as one foot slipped down, followed by your body slowly disappearing beneath the opened tile. A stone staircase awaited, damp and brittle, as though no human foot had touched it for centuries. Every step down was accompanied by faint whispers that came from no particular direction. The words were unfamiliar, but the rhythm was like a prayer never meant to rise upward. That narrow passage grew more suffocating, not in size, but in the way the air seemed to reject your presence. The walls were covered in hand-scratched marks like the writing. Children who didn't know letters but knew exactly what they wanted to say. Symbols were carved in repeated sequences, forming something like a rite, and in its silence, the corridor felt like it was memorizing your name. When you reached the base of the stairs, the passage opened into a circular underground chamber, and in its center an altar of black stone cracked down the middle as if split by a sound too loud to hear. And upon that altar, there was no book, no cross, but something that could not be named. It was made of metal, yet it pulsed like flesh. It stared at you without eyes, and you knew you would never be able to read anything the same way again. There was no sound when you tried to touch the object. Even your heartbeat seemed to stop, replaced by a silence that shimmered like wind at the ocean floor. Its surface was cold, but not the cold of ordinary metal. It carried a kind of aversion to touch, as if every finger laid upon it insulted something older than time itself. Around the altar, the stone floor revealed faint traces not made by human feet, but by claws, or worse, fingers too long that dragged their own bodies. The walls of the chamber began to reveal strange paintings when seen from a certain angle. There were faceless monks standing in a circle, their heads tilted back as though listening to voices from deep within the earth. They carried no crosses, only crooked staffs that seemed planted rather than held. And in every painting, hidden in some corner, was the same symbol. The shape of an eye with an empty pupil bisected by a vertical line. That same mark was faintly etched onto the tile beneath your feet. And when you stepped on it, the floor exhaled. A long breath, like from lungs long decayed but not yet done breathing. Instantly, the flashlight in your hand dimmed, then died. But it wasn't darkness that came. Another light replaced a tread, alive and glowing from beneath the skin of the altar. You realized then the object atop the stone hadn't been placed there. It had grown. No monastery bell rang that night, and the sundial in the courtyard had long been buried in moss. Yet time still moved, though no longer obeying the laws of nature. The red light beneath the altar began seeping into the cracks of the walls, flowing like old blood, searching for its own channels. The air trembled lightly, not from sound, but from an awareness rising from a long sleep. On the stone shelves that were previously empty, now appeared stacks of manuscripts that could not have simply materialized. Pages made from animal skins too smooth to be called lamb, scripts that coiled like serpents in constriction, letters that were neither Latin or Greek nor Hebrew, yet carried a deep sense of antiquity, like a language made to whisper to a sky that had already died. In the center of the room, the air grew heavy and damp, like standing at the bottom of an old well. Your breath shortened, and your thoughts began to blur. But one thing still drew your eyes. The book you saw in dreams, resting beside the altar, unlocked, unhidden. Its cover was glossy black, yet seemed to absorb the light around it. And when you opened it, the first page bore only one sentence, written in a language you did not know, but somehow understood. It did not call upon the name of the God you've heard before. It called upon a name forgotten by history, yet not done listening. You want to close the book, but your hand feels frozen. Your fingers turn cold, as if they had touched snow storing the memories of a dead season. Each letter on the page seems to move slowly, gently swaying like the breath of a creature yet to be born. There's a rhythm not heard but felt, like whispers rising from within your own skull. It does not speak with sound, but with memory. It shows you shadows, not light. Flickers of another world flash through your mind, a place where the sky isn't blue, but old gray, veined like the skin of the aged. A city stands amid eternal fog, with towers built not to gaze at the heavens, but to keep something from descending. Its streets are filled with shadows without owners, and its windows face inward, not outward. There is no sun, no time. Only the torturous repetition, like prayers spoken without belief. And in the center of it all, a figure writes. Sitting at a stone desk, pen in hand, unblinking eyes. He writes of humans, but not the kind we know. He writes of pleas, of sacrifice, of doors that should not be opened. And when you come to yourself again, the book is resting in your lap, and you know you've read something no breathing creature should have ever read. You rise slowly from the cold stone floor, your body feeling older than before, as if every tendon and joint had been stretched back through time. The air in the room grows thicker, made of book dust and swallowed secrets. No sound exists except for the slow thump of your heart and the faint whispering from the cracked walls. Something or someone is watching you, not with eyes, but with knowledge, as if your existence was written long before you were born. You step back, but no door can be seen. The walls shift, rearranging themselves every time you blink. At the far end of the chamber, a robe hangs on a staff. Not a monk's robe, nor that of a noble, but something worn only once and only for one purpose. The cloth is dull black, and its inner lining bears symbols unrecognizable, though your mind struggles to match them with alphabets, numbers, or spells. You know the robe wasn't created, but passed down from hands unseen. And as you look longer, you realize the robe isn't hanging, it's floating, slowly turning in the air, as if awaiting a new owner. For a moment, you glimpse your own shadow cast against the wall behind it. But it's not a shadow, you know. It's taller, thinner, and its eyes are open, though you're not looking in a mirror. When you try to turn away, the world refuses. The floor remains beneath your feet, yet gravity seems to twist in every direction. There is no dizziness, only a profound loss of orientation, as if you are lost not in a place, but in an idea. The walls now whisper louder, speaking in a language that once existed, but is no longer spoken. The words sound like an old chant from a sunken land. You don't know their meaning, but your body does. Your skin shivers, sensing a command hidden beneath the rhythm. You take another step, unaware, moving closer to the robe. The air around you grows heavy. It feels like entering dense water or a memory forcibly forgotten. When your hand rises, it's not by your will, but by the will of the room. Your fingertips touch the robe's fabric, still hovering midair, and in an instant, you see not with your eyes, but with a part of your mind long dormant. You see a table carved from bone, copies of sacred texts written in dried blood, and a group of monks who do not pray to the same God. They worship something known, yet never taught. Their eyes are empty, but their hands are busy writing, recording, and burying manuscripts. The robe is part of a ritual not to open heaven, but to silence something that almost escaped. Imagine if all this time we had only read the first version, the one that survived, the version edited, reread, and translated through the lens of power. But the second book, buried beneath the floor, was never meant to be found again. It was written in ink made from ash soil on pages of skin that cannot be identified. Within its pages, there are no tales of the world's creation, but chronicles of erasure of beings removed from reality. It does not speak of the first sin, but reminds of awareness abandoned by time. There are names in the text that cannot be spoken, not because they are difficult, but because each syllable unlocks a sealed memory. You begin reading not with your mouth, but with your breath. The letters seem to move slowly, adjusting to your gaze. And each line plants something inside your head. Shapes without angles, sounds that cannot be muffled. And the realization that there was a time before history and that time was never lost. It only slept, like this book, like something waiting for its old name to be spoken once again. We often imagine knowledge as light that spreads. But what if there is a light that cannot be seen, not because it is dim, but because it is too foreign for human eyes to recognize? In this second book, such a light exists. It is not a truth that explains, but a truth that unsettles. One page tells of a room without direction, where scribes wrote with closed eyes and fingers that moved on their own. On the opposite page is a prayer that cannot be spoken with the tongue, only with a long silence and a held breath. This book does not seem written for anyone to read, more like a vessel intentionally left full so the world would not spill. But the floor has been opened. The dust is gone. And now, when the book is touched, the room around you slowly stops moving. The candle no longer flickers. The walls become too quiet, as if the space itself is listening, or worse, remembering. If you ask the elder monks, they will slowly shake their heads and say that some words were not created to be spoken, only to be endured. And if you insist on asking again, they will look at you for a long time, as if trying to measure a kind of courage you might not possess. In that book, the middle pages are filled with diagrams that cannot be translated. Geometric shapes that seem impossible. Letters that curl inward as if resisting to be read. There are symbols that resemble faces, not human faces, but something trying to mimic a human face and failing in a way that makes your skin crawl. Sometimes, readers feel as though something is watching them from behind the page. Not out of fear, but because something is also reading them. One of the library keepers once said that after holding the book too long, he could no longer dream. His sleep was peaceful, yes, but empty. No dreams, no shadows. As if his mind no longer belonged to him. and the quiet nights that followed felt heavier, like whispers coming from behind the stone walls. Once, when winter arrived too early and snow buried the monastery before the harvest was done, the younger monks were ordered to comfort themselves with reading. But one of them, a quiet young man who usually guarded the chapel at night, chose that forbidden book. No one knew how he got it. Perhaps he found it again behind a pile of stones in the cellar. Or perhaps the book chose him. He began reading slowly, page by page, without rest, without pause, even without sound. His eyes turned red, not from sleepiness, but from something unseen pressing into his mind. His companions noticed small changes. He began drawing symbols on the walls of his room, arranging candles in patterns no one had taught. Until one morning, he didn't wake up. His body remained warm, but his soul seemed gone. Beside him, the book lay open, showing a page that no one could read, not even those who had read it before. From that day on, the book was buried again. Not because they feared what was written inside, but because they feared what it could write anew. As time passed slowly like morning mist, the monastery still stood. Yet strange sounds began to echo from beneath the basement floor. Soft sounds, almost like breathing, sometimes like whispers in a language they did not know, sometimes like echoes of prayers never taught. The older monks said it was just the sound of wind and age. But the novices who had not yet learned to deny what they saw and heard believed the book was not silent. There were nights when the chapel cross tilted to the left as if pulled by another gravity. There were moments when the monastery clock stopped at midnight, then moved backward for 7 seconds before ticking again. And most unsettling of all, the feeling. The sense that when they prayed to their God, something else was also listening from beneath the stone floor, from a depth without a name, from pages never meant to be opened. So the monastery became a place where faith was tested, not by the suffering of the world, but by the silent whispers of a second text that should never be read. Now close your eyes and imagine the night inside that silent monastery. The cold air hangs heavy, carrying the scent of old books, extinguished candles, and something older than time. Your footsteps on the stone corridor sound soft, yet their echoes rebound like a sign that you are not alone. The wind through the stained glass window moves slowly, touching unopened manuscripts, rustling pages as if trying to reveal one last passage. And beneath you, far beneath the marble tiles of the altar, the second book remains buried. Not burned, not cursed, not destroyed, merely hidden. Perhaps for reasons we will never understand. The monks are long gone. Their names forgotten, their quarters decayed, and their bell no longer rings. Yet this story endures, whispered quietly from one tongue to another, told only when the night is very still and the moon is hidden behind fog. You may forget it when you wake, but part of it will remain with you, tucked away in a quiet corner of your mind. Because some stories do not ask to be remembered, only not to be forgotten entirely.